What about those first home buyers who've taken advantage of the government's 5% deposit scheme? Are some already struggling to meet their repayments?
Not yet. So far, so good in terms of our home loan book, but I think it's still pretty early to tell what the ultimate impact of this crisis is going to be.
You think you could hear from them?
We could, yeah. But so far, I think we're continuing to watch this space. Well, it's interesting times, that's for sure, although I must say it must also be hard for many of our customers running small and medium-sized businesses. These are uncertain times, and we're just doing the best that we can to look after our customers.
NAB has already announced that it was increasing its provisions for bad debts. Should shareholders read into that you do hold concerns not just about the economic outlook, but the bank's own outlook against the increasingly uncertain geopolitical backdrop?
Yeah, I think it's the uncertainty that caused us to increase our provisions. We frankly don't actually know how this is all going to play out. We're still obviously in a situation where the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East is closed. And so I think what's clear is that it's unclear. And these are really, really volatile times. And we just wanted to be prudent. That's not to say that we're seeing any escalating levels of bad debts in our business. In fact, when you look at the business, activity levels continue to be extremely robust in both our home lending business as well as in our business bank. But it's our expectation that activity levels are going to drop because we have seen confidence drop as a result of this crisis.
Will it drop because there's another interest rate rise on the cards tomorrow?
Yeah, you're right to say that the RBA is meeting tomorrow, and it's our bank expectation that we'll see a further quarter-point rise tomorrow. We'll have to see if that actually does happen. The reason why we're here, of course, is that inflation is running at far in excess of the RBA's target band, and inflation needs to come down.
With 3 possible rate rises in 3 meetings and increasing fuel prices, how are your mortgage borrowers holding up?
Well, so far it's remarkably resilient. In the last year when we had a couple of rate cuts, 80% of our home lending customers did not change their payments. So they've been able to absorb the 2 increases that we've had to date without any impact to them. I suspect that things will get a little bit harder from here, but it's also true that homeowners enter this more difficult period from a position of strength. Deposit accounts are high, balances are high, and offset accounts are also at really strong levels. So I think most of our customers will be able to withstand the difficulties that are coming. And what I would say for those homeowners that are struggling a little bit more, please do reach out to us. The sooner we can work with you to help, I think the better things can be.
What about those first home buyers who've taken advantage of the government's 5% deposit scheme? Are some already struggling to meet their repayments?
Not yet. So far, so good in terms of our home loan book, but I think it's still pretty early to tell what the ultimate impact of this crisis is going to be.
You think you could hear from them?
We could, yeah. But so far, I think we're continuing to watch this space.
Does that mean that the scheme itself encourages risky borrowing?
Look, not necessarily. I think what the government was seeking to do was make housing more attainable for young people. And that's, I think, something that we would applaud. And we've actually done a fair bit of lending as a result of that scheme. We just want to make sure that obviously those customers are able to afford those payments, and we do adjudicate on that basis.
How are businesses dealing with the uncertainty and the tougher conditions? Some sectors clearly are copping the brunt of higher fuel prices more than others. What are small and big businesses telling you about the decisions they're making right now?
Well, what they are telling us they're really worried about is cost inflation. And they're seeing costs in their businesses rise. That started with the cost of fuel, diesel in particular, but also petrol. But I think other pressures are going to be emerging as we speak. Petroleum and petroleum products are in the vast number of consumables that we use every day in our lives, things like plastics, things like packaging, construction materials, and we're yet to see those costs really escalate. And I think when we talk to small and medium-sized businesses, that's what they're worried about. And then they're concerned as to whether or not they can pass those costs on to their own consumers.
Without any significant change over in the Middle East, when do you think this is really going to bite the economy?
Look, I think it's hard to tell. My best guess would be in the kind of 3 to 6 month period. But again, it all depends on what happens in the Middle East. And if indeed that we can open things up there, hopefully that will neutralize some of the worst impacts that may otherwise befall us.
What does it mean for house prices?
You know, our view is that house prices will probably continue to increase, but at a lower level than they have been today.
The government has cushioned the blow to some extent with the temporary 50% discount to fuel excise. Should the government extend that past the end of July to support business through this period?
Look, I think that that's a decision that's best made closer to the time. So it's hard to predict what they should or should not do as I sit here today. I think it depends on the relative economic pressures that we're seeing in the country and whether or not things have opened up in the Middle East. So I think that's a decision best made at a later date.
Are there specific measures you would like to see in next week's budget to help cushion the blow from the fallout?
Yeah, there are. You know, if I were speaking to the Treasurer, I'd say first and foremost, what we'd like to see is fiscal prudence and a balanced budget. I think that's very important for the country. And then beyond that, we'd like to see policy measures that really help the country with the productivity challenges that we're facing so that we can increase supply. The issue right now that we have is that just prior to the Middle East crisis, Australia was growing a little bit too fast and demand was outstripping supply. And what we need to make sure that as a country, we can grow at a faster rate than we can today. And that means more housing, it means cheaper energy, and it means unshackling the private sector with, you know, regulations that are a little bit too overburdensome.
From what we know so far, savings from the NDIS, likely in property investor tax breaks, and possibly new taxes on trusts, is that going to help boost productivity?
Yeah, look, from a tax policy setting, we would advocate reform, but it's also important that, generally speaking, taxes are neutral in aggregate. And so where they might rise in one or two areas, we'd like to see correspondingly offsetting reductions elsewhere.
Was the government wrong to rule out a windfall tax on gas exports?
Look, our view is that's probably sound judgment. When we have relationships with other countries, they rely on Australia doing what it said it would. And so anything that creates surprise for people buying our products and services isn't good for bilateral trade. And we also must remember that many of these countries that buy our gas are also refining the crude oil that we need to ensure that we don't have supply shortages.
If a windfall gas tax was to be imposed, do you think it would only be a matter of time before a super profits tax was imposed on the banks?
Look, I'm not going to speculate on what types of tax measures the government may or may not deliver.
Just finally, against the very complex geopolitical backdrop, how ambitious should the government be?
Our view is that we can't let this crisis go to waste. And while things might be difficult, nothing has changed with regard to the reforms that are needed in the long term to enable Australia to grow and to increase our standards of living.
Andrew Irvine, thank you.
Thank you.